Psalm 132. Remember, O Lord, in David's favour, all the hardship he endured, how he swore to the Lord and vowed to the Mighty One of Jacob, I will not enter my house or get into my bed. I will not give sleep to my eyes or slumber to my eyelids, until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the Mighty One of Jacob. Behold, we heard of it in Ephrathah. We found it in the fields of Yar. Let us go to his dwelling place. Let us worship at his footstool. Arise, O Lord, and go to your resting place, you and the ark of your might. Let your priests be clothed with righteousness, and let your saints shout for joy. For the sake of your servant David, do not turn away the face of your anointed one. The Lord swore to David a sure oath from which he will not turn back. One of the sons of your body I will set on your throne. If your sons keep my covenant and my testimonies that I shall teach them, their sons also forever shall sit on your throne. For the Lord has chosen Zion, he has desired it for his dwelling place. This is my resting place forever. Here I will dwell, for I have desired it. I will abundantly bless her provisions. I will satisfy her poor with bread. Her priests I will clothe with salvation, and her saints will shout for joy. There I will make a horn to sprout for David. I have prepared a lamp for my anointed. His enemies I will clothe with shame, but on him his crown will shine.
Hey, thanks, Rich, for reading. We made you work harder than most of the other readers have recently. Where's my short, pithy psalm that I've become used to? This one really stands out as the odd one out in the collection, partly on word count, but also on style, more a history lesson than immediately a heart gripper. And even if you prefer more words and less of the touchy-feely stuff, relevance to us? We've reached the final set of 3 songs of ascents, and this trio are all about home. They're all a picture of what it means to arrive in New Jerusalem. Remember, home is where we're heading on this journey of the Christian life. And home, it turns out here, is where the King is. You will find this psalm irrelevant unless you have a clear sense that the greatest thing you need in your life is the right kind of king. Now, for some of us, that will sound very weird, because I take it that if you were in a burning building or in any kind of trouble, and you could only call one person to come to your rescue, I don't expect many of us would be on the phone to Prince Charles. We're cynical about royalty, as we are about leaders and heroes generally. That's the point, actually, of the Disney movie Frozen. They call it Disney's coming-of-age movie. We're all grown-ups now, even in the world of children's animation. We're not looking for true love's kiss or a handsome prince or any other hero than the hero to be found in here. Who knew Disney could be so profound? But it was no easier for ancient Israel to be optimistic just because they lived in the olden days. Maybe they had more reasons to be cynical than us. They lived through some shocking leaders. And yet, just as we still crave champions to come to our rescue, they knew that hope for the people of God rested on the hope of a king. Many of us are used to that idea. Yeah, King Jesus, we know. But are you convinced that all of the promises and the comfort that we've felt on this journey that we've been tracking through the Songs of Ascent, all of it hangs on the hope of a king? 2 Samuel 7 is the really important chapter of the Bible where God covenanted with David that all his promises to bless and be with his people forever would be realized through a special one in David's line. And that's why I see in this psalm we're praying for the king. Verse 1, remember, O Lord, in David's favor. And then verse 10, for the sake of your servant David, do not turn away the face of your anointed. I don't expect many of us lie awake at night worrying about whether everything's okay at Buckingham Palace. But if you felt like your destiny properly depended on the people in there, well, maybe you would. Because for home to be everything it's cracked up to be depends on God keeping faith with the king. Let's look first at David's promise here. David was a generally godly king, and he didn't just win mighty battles. He wanted to make sure that the Lord was worshipped at the heart of community life. God's people in so many eras were travelers on a journey, as we've been saying we are. But in David's time, there was a real sense that they'd arrived. No more tents, Jerusalem established as the capital city. And David's plan was that the city really should be the city of God. The king had a permanent home there. And David feels zealous that the Lord should too. So he vows in verse 4, I will not give sleep to my eyes or slumber to my eyelids until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob. See, the Lord had been, in a sense, a temporary dweller as well. Obviously, he doesn't live in houses built by men, but the Ark of the Covenant, which symbolized his presence with them, was a mobile home. Verse 6 is describing their national treasure hunt to find the Ark. And verse 7 to 9 seem to be David's vision for what God's resting place should be, a showpiece of worship and righteousness and joy, symbolizing that the Lord is with us, among us forever. No more tents for him either. Feels like a godly ambition David had to build a place for the Lord. But the Lord had other ideas. And this is our second point. It's about God's more sure promise. Jean was an older lady in the church I grew up in as a boy. Jean had a special birthday. I think it was her 80th, and a few of Jean's friends from church clubbed together to buy her a special painting for her sitting room. So on the big day, they all gathered together to watch Jean unwrap the painting. Lots of anticipation for her reaction, which came immediately as Jean announced, "Ugh, I couldn't possibly live with that thing in my house." Now, I don't know what the rules are, but it seems there's a certain age that you pass where that kind of reaction becomes socially acceptable. You don't have to fake what you think about anything, and out of deference for elders, people aren't even allowed to call you a grumpy old so-and-so. Well, 2 Samuel 7 that I've already mentioned, that's the chapter where David presented his "I want to give you a house, God" idea. And the Lord said, "Thanks, but no thanks." Not out of ingratitude or grumpiness. Rather, God said, "David, it's actually better if I trump your oath with a better one." Verse 11, this is summarizing what happened there in 2 Samuel 7. The Lord swore to David a sure oath from which he will not turn back. In the original, that literally reads, "The Lord made an oath to David, the truth." In other words, God is saying, I'm the one who makes the promises around here. I wonder, had David just got slightly above himself after all his great conquests. I won't slumber or sleep until I've built a house for the Lord. But we know in the Songs of Ascents that the Lord is the one who never slumbers or sleeps. Psalm 121. We also know that he loves to give his beloved one sleep. Psalm 127, as he reminded us that he is the one who ultimately builds the house, the family. And that's the context for his oath to David here, the truth from which he will not turn back. Verse 11 again. One of the sons of your body I will set on your throne, if your sons keep my covenant and my testimonies that I shall teach them. Their sons also forever shall sit on your throne. God's saying to David that the dynamic will, as it has been, remain, that he is the giver all the way. He's the one who makes and keeps the promises. And what you see is the city of God that David passionately wanted to build and had a vision for in the first half of the psalm is redescribed in verses 13 to 18. So verse 13, there will be a dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob, because verse 14, God desires it. And there will be priests clothed with salvation and saints shouting with joy, because he guarantees it. Notice the repeated language, I will, I will. And there will be a son who sprouts from David at the heart of the city that God has vowed to put in place. Now, we looked at verse 11 and 12 there. I want us to look back at those verses again, because they are the heart of the promise, but they also highlight the elephant in the room. Look at verse 11 again. One of the sons of your body I will set on your throne, if your sons keep my covenant and my testimonies that I shall teach them, if they keep it. See, that's the real trick that neither sinful David nor the sinful sons of David were ever able to pull off. And this is at the heart of why we really need a king in our lives. Because if the New Jerusalem is going to last forever, with the righteous Lord at the heart of it, and a righteous people who are godly enough to dwell with the Lord there, then we need leadership in our life from someone who can actually nail this basic thing of keeping the Lord's commandments. The whole book of the Psalms, the 150 of them, are actually a great symphony in search for the hero who can obey. It's not David, it's not Solomon, that's all the first half of the Psalms. And then at the end of book 3, Psalm 89, it feels like Yahweh has done the shocking thing of renouncing his covenant with David, is what it says there. It says, the crown, David's crown, is in the dust. As the enemies mock and the nation spirals downwards, God seems hidden. But the last section of the book of Psalms, that's where we're in the Songs of Ascents, that revives hope. Verse 17. Verse 17, there I will make a horn sprout from David. I have prepared a lamp for my anointed. His enemies I will clothe with shame, but on him his crown will shine. The crown that was kicked into the dust, it seemed, in Psalm 89, is not down there forever, because verse 18 describes a leader whose crown will shine. That has the sense of a reign that will blossom permanently. Could there be such a one? We are so used to failures, aren't we? Leaders who disappoint, spiritual leaders who disappoint, centuries of failure. Are we too cynical off the back of that for the idea of hero kings? Well, that's to say, are we too cynical to trust anything of God's better future? Because it's all tied up with the king here. A dwelling place, no more tents, no more faraway places or life on the road. It'll be such a relief for weary travellers to finally settle down with the Lord, won't it? Notice provided for, verse 15. Clothed with robes of salvation, verse 16. Full of joy, coming home with shouts of joy, remember? No more enemies, verse 18. And more stuff. The next two Psalms are a continuation of this scene. At the heart of it all, an obedient king with a crown that shines, and the shine will never wear off his crown through ineptitude or scandal or because of his dodgy tweets or just because he's been around for so long that you're bored with him. No, you'll never get bored of being led by God's beautifully righteous anointed one. Well, let's think about so what for a few minutes as we finish. Well, the so what for the crowd first reading this in the story of the whole book of Psalms. Remember, Psalms was put together for them at a time when they were coming back from the exile into the land, but ruled by others, no godly leadership to speak of. What an assurance that God was still committed to the cause, no matter how weak things looked on the ground for them, because he was committed to the idea of his anointed one. And what a relief that just as the Lord's commitment trumped David's, the great hope for these people coming back to the land was not their capacity to rebuild the house, important though that was. No matter how passionate or energetic God's people were, hope rested in God's sure, unbreakable oath to David. Hence the prayers here. Remember David, Lord, remember what you've said. Don't give up on your idea of a forever king like this. Now, obviously, we're further on in the historical timeline. We can see this whole psalm fragrant with a much deeper assurance that is ours, because it's the fragrance of the Christ. We've seen the Son of David, the Son of David, in action in the Gospels, obeying, blessing, bringing salvation, shaming enemies, shining. The prayers of this psalm were answered. And yet we can still wonder in our day, is God hiding as the enemies run rampant and his people are mocked? Do the promises still stand? We've been talking about that in the Songs of Ascents, and we can feel so far from home. For us, I think the application is partly about not trusting ourselves to build the kingdom. Some of us have great godly ambitions, made great promises to the Lord, and I feel very conscious of speaking to a crowd this morning where so many of you have huge energy and are deeply sacrificial in the work of building the house. We're grateful for that here, and that's in a sense being like David in a good way. But like David, we may need the gentle rebuke from the Lord every now and again. Who's really doing what for whom around here? And don't get this wrong, our service is valued by the Lord. It's important in the working out of his purposes. But we're not the ones building the house ultimately. So go to bed and rest not in your labours and commitment, but in his sure oath from which he will not turn back. But I think there's a bigger application still here. See, we've been talking about our personal relationship with God in this series, and I don't want to stop talking about our personal relationship with him. But my personal hope is bigger than me and where I'm at with him. It's about where God is at with his anointed one. It's about his covenant, his relationship with his king. All of God's promises to me are yes in and through the person of that king. And that's a huge idea in the Bible. You want to explore it more. The Psalms are a good place to start, especially some of the more famous ones that get quoted in the New Testament as being fulfilled in Jesus. But the upshot is that I can go to bed knowing that God will never give up on me, because I can be sure he'll never give up on the Son of David on the throne. Take that thought back into the detail of your personal journey. Go through the Songs of Ascents again and reflect on how your hope hangs on your king. So distressed, you have a king who has shared in that distress and come out the other side. Overwhelmed by enemy attack, you have a king who has defeated the enemy. Feeling unworthy to stand in the city of God, you have a righteous king who has clothed you in righteousness. Home, though, is there really the home described here? We want it to be true. Well, the question to keep asking is God still committed to his king? Because the whole point of what God is doing with his king is driving towards this future. Where there's a king, there's this city on the way. And that's why we pray, come Lord Jesus, come King Jesus. Why wouldn't you when you see what it's like where he reigns? And it's why we mustn't give up on a more permanent home. This life is the journey, but soon we will be home on the coattails of the King, and his crown will shine forever.